Previously on Myron and Jenny Levitt, the longest night of our lives.
Where the accident was happening, and our assistant pastor called me on the phone. He said they have all the roads shut down. I had to kind of go back way, but I got over to where the accident is at, and he said it's definitely Caleb's truck. He said they won't tell me anything more than that. And I said, okay, no problem. So I'm about 2 minutes away. Went across the intersection, and I see probably 50 yards down the road, I actually see this big white truck rolled over. The truck is a mess, and this was like midnight or a little bit later, and it was because of the street lights were there. I could see the truck, and I'm thinking to myself, somebody did not survive that wreck. And then I see my son's truck. Again, the entire front end is ripped off the truck. So there's a cop kind of standing by. So I go over to him and I said, where are the boys that were in that truck? So we're back in the trauma ICU waiting room. It's a very, very small waiting room there. Finally, a state trooper shows up. This entire time we're going to the trauma nurses. Can I get an update? And they're like, we don't have an update. Do you have a Jacob Levitt? No, we don't have a Jacob Levitt. The state trooper shows up and he comes in to talk to us, and he's sitting there. He receives a phone call. So he answers the phone and he said, yes. He said, your son was involved in an accident. He said, he is so drunk and belligerent here at the hospital. He's physically fighting the nurses and the doctors. He said, you need to get down here right now. And he hangs up and he looks over to us, and is that the person who hit our son? That's that drunk? And he said, yes. And I said, and he's okay? He's like, well, he's got some bumps and bruises, but yes, he's okay. He said that there was a passenger in that vehicle as well. They were both 18 years old. Both of them were drunk. The 18-year-old did sustain some minor injuries. He ended up being in the hospital, I think, like 3 days. He had a punctured lung, some broken ribs, I think, that kind of a thing. So we kept asking him, can you give us where's Jacob? Where's Jacob? It's just so confusing because he's like, I don't have a record of a Jacob. I said, Jacob was in that vehicle when the wreck happened. And he said, I don't believe that's the case. And so at this time, I have called all of our friends who are not there, anybody who Jacob could have rode home with. Have you heard from Jacob? When was the last time you saw Jacob? So we don't know if Jacob at this point is with a friend somewhere or, got to ride home with somebody else. Very out of character for him to do anything like that. But we're just so confused. So at one point, every time we would get any kind of an update, we would have to walk out. I would walk out and kind of update the folks who are out in the lobby and tell them, okay, here's where we're at. Caleb is here. He's in critical condition. It was a miracle that he was even alive at that point. He was actually literally bleeding out internally. His liver had been lacerated. So he was bleeding out internally. So they're like, we have to get him into the emergency OR now. Do you want to see him before we take him up? And we're like, yes, of course. So we go back and we see him, and it's every parent's nightmare what we walked into. I mean, he's bleeding out of his nose, his mouth, his ears, they're just pouring, blood, and his face is all beat up. And we were even asking the doctor, they said the vehicle was on fire, how badly is he burned? And the doctors were like, he's not burned. And so what? Okay, wow, all right. So they get him off up to OR. We're still there, and in the little trauma room, emergency room area, waiting, trying to get some updates, when the state troopers came back and said, we need to talk to you over here. And so we go in there. There were 3 state troopers, and they come in and they said, we've got to tell you that Jacob did pass away in the wreck. And it was very difficult. They handed Jenny a Ziploc bag with Jacob's bloody wallet, his bloody class ring. He was a senior in high school. He had just got his class ring, like $3 in money that he had in his pocket, and said, this is what we have left. So we were, obviously we're devastated, and the state troopers told us this right after that. They said, we have a witness that thinks that your son ran the red light. And if that's the case, we could be, if Caleb survives, we could be charging him with vehicular manslaughter.
So in the same conversation that they just came in and brought us a baggie with our youngest son's pocket contents.
Why were they so convinced it wasn't him?
Yeah, I think because it was a investigation, I think that they were keeping all of the information very close to chest, and they were kind of like not giving out any information as to who it was in the accident, any of that kind of thing, because it was a DUI manslaughter issue. So the state troopers, 2 of them got up, walked out, leaving one state trooper there, and we're just reeling. We're like, what do we do? And the state trooper, as he was heading out of the room, he said, you need to get a lawyer and you need to get a good one, and walked out the door. That was it. At that point, we walked out to where our friends are at, and we said, we just got word that Jacob did pass away in the accident, and Caleb is in emergency operation right now to save his life. Really, at that point, we're now just on standby. We sat there, we waited, they got Caleb came through the surgery. They got the lacerated liver repaired, and that was the beginning of a very long 2 or 3 weeks. And again, anybody who's been through something like that, it's just such a fog. It's almost like you can't even really, count the days. You don't even remember how long it was. And
I can't remember how many surgeries he had in those first 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, we literally have to, or at least I do, I have to start with the top of Caleb's head and work my way down when I'm trying to remember all of his injuries. Traumatic brain injury, broke every bone in his face, blew out both of his eardrums, fractured his C7 vertebrae, broke several ribs, broke his right arm, his left femur, his tailbone. I feel like I'm missing
pelvis, 3 places.
But all of those came slowly as they stabilized him a little more, and then he was in a coma for part of that. We didn't know. They warned us when they have a traumatic brain injury, you never know what you're going to get if they come out of it. Thank God. He's Caleb. He did have to go through some serious testing, and he's got a couple memory issues, but they're nothing major. Really, if you didn't know him, you probably would never even notice it, which is just the grace of God. But it was a long haul for him for recovery, probably about a year, really, altogether. It was a really long road.
Yeah, he came home, when he finally was allowed to come home after, months of physical therapy, in-house physical therapy, came home in a wheelchair and then graduated from a wheelchair to the walker to the cane. He came through it and, had some very real issues. As you can imagine, being the older brother, being the one who was driving, the guilt that he faced far outweighed the physical issues that he dealt with. Why not me? I'm the older brother. I'm supposed to take care of him. All those type of things. He really dealt with a lot of that kind of thing. And, I feel probably to this day, he'll probably always deal with that to some degree. He's come through. He's an amazing young man. I tell people all the time, he's one of those kids that he gets out of the hospital. He's got his AA. And he's like, well, if I've got to be at home in a wheelchair, I'm going to go back to school. I'm doing it. And goes back to college online and gets his teaching degree, focusing on special education. He graduated with his teaching degree, specializing in special education children. And even when he was in his wheelchair, he started a business selling ties. He found this supplier of ties, and of course we went to church. Everybody wore a tie, and so he found a need, and he met that need. And he had a little custom box made for his ties, and it fit right on his lap.